The explosion ripped through the northern wing of the American embassy with a deafening roar, sending glass and concrete debris hurtling through the air. Black smoke billowed from shattered windows as emergency alarms wailed across the compound. Inside, the bodies of 3 security personnel lay motionless near what remained of the security checkpoint. Beyond them, 37 embassy staff huddled in the designated safe room, but the reinforced door wouldn't hold much longer against the shaped charges being placed by the attackers. Outside the embassy walls, local military forces had established a perimeter, but orders prevented them from entering. No extraction team had been authorized. No help was coming, at least none that would ever appear in any official record. In the darkness beyond the embassy's eastern fence, 6 figures materialized like ghosts. No insignia marked their tactical gear. No flags identified their country of origin. Their faces were obscured behind advanced breathing apparatus and night vision systems. They moved with the fluid precision of predators, each step purposeful, each movement economical. The team leader raised a fist halt. The 5 others froze instantly, her voice low and calm despite the chaos unfolding 100 yards away, carried through their secure communication system. Reaper 2, take overwatch position. 3 and 4 eastern entry. 5 and 6 with me through service tunnel. Minimal casualties, maximum efficiency. These hostiles do not leave with hostages. No acknowledgement was necessary. Each operator knew their role with absolute certainty. The leader, call sign Phantom, consulted the holographic display projected on her wrist device, confirming thermal signatures of both hostiles and hostages. 23 armed insurgents, 37 civilians. The math was simple. The execution would be anything but. Execute in 3, 2, 1. What followed was not a battle but a surgical operation. The 6 operators breached the embassy from 3 different points simultaneously. The first 4 insurgents dropped before they even registered the intrusion. Phantom moved through the building like a wraith, her custom-modified Mk18 CQBR carbine dispatching targets with mechanical precision, 2 rounds center mass for each textbook efficiency, with not a single bullet wasted. When it was over, all 23 insurgents were down. 37 hostages were secured. The 6 operators vanished into the night, leaving behind no evidence of their presence beyond the inexplicable precision of the rescue operation. No medals would be awarded, no commendations recorded. The official report would attribute the rescue to local security forces and favorable circumstances. Just another night for the operators of Talon. Fort Westridge, Texas, 222. The sun hammered down on the sprawling military training facility with merciless intensity. Heat waves distorted the horizon across the barren training grounds, creating mirages that danced above the scorched earth. A formation of 180 soldiers was finishing their morning drills, their movements precise despite the punishing temperature that had already climbed past 95 degrees before noon. The military transport rolled to a stop at the edge of the compound, its engine growling in protest against the heat. As the doors swung open, Lieutenant Mackenzie Mac Blackwood stepped out, her boots meeting Texas dirt with quiet certainty. She adjusted her duffel bag across one shoulder, eyes scanning the vast compound with a careful assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating terrain for threats and advantages. Her arrival didn't go unnoticed. The soldiers in formation turned one by one, their disciplined ranks momentarily forgetting protocol as they registered the anomaly in their midst. Not just a new officer, a woman, the only female among them. Mac walked past without acknowledging their stares. 4 years at West Point and 7 years in active service had taught her that attention was rarely an advantage in her profession. Better to be underestimated, better to be overlooked. She wasn't here to make friends or break barriers. Orders were orders, and she had earned her slot in this elite combat training unit through merit, not tokenism. Still whispers ignited like a brush fire as she passed. "Great diversity points," one soldier muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "Bet she doesn't last a week," another added with a smirk. A few raised eyebrows in curiosity, perhaps impressed by her unflinching confidence, but most just stared, watching her like an anomaly they couldn't yet categorize. The silent question hung in the air. What was she doing here inside the command building? Mac stood at attention, her posture perfect, as Colonel James Harrington entered the room. The air seemed to stiffen with his arrival. At 68, Harrington was a towering relic of an older military-era Gulf War Afghanistan, countless classified operations judging by the campaign ribbons. Rigid in posture, cold in tone, and meticulous in every movement, he carried himself with the weight of decades of command. His face was weathered by sun and war eyes sharp beneath heavy brows that had seen too much to be easily impressed. He barely glanced at her file before addressing her. "You're Lieutenant Blackwood," he asked, voice flat as the Texas horizon. "Yes, sir." He scanned her face, looking for weakness. Finding none, his expression hardened. "Your orders come from high up. I trust you understand the environment here. This isn't basic training." "I understand, sir." "Good." He snapped the folder shut. "You'll be joining 2nd Platoon. You'll be evaluated in 3 weeks for long-term assignment eligibility. That is all. Dismissed." No handshake, no welcome, just an unspoken message in his eyes. "I didn't ask for you to be here." Mac had faced worse. She saluted sharply, turned and walked out, leaving behind the echo of silent judgment. Her barracks assignment was tucked far at the end of the row, separate from the others. Some accommodations still hadn't caught up with policy. The room was sparse, a steel-framed bed, a small desk, a locker that had seen better days. The walls were bare except for a faded poster showing the chain of command. That first night, she unpacked in silence. Her belongings were few uniforms, boots, a weathered copy of Sun Tzu's Art of War, and a single-frame photograph. The image showed a younger Mac standing beside a tall man in full-dress uniform, Colonel's eagles gleaming on his shoulders. Her father's face bore the same determined expression she now carried. The frame had seen better days, its corners dented from being carried through too many deployments. Morning arrived without mercy at 0430 hours. The base came alive with the sounds of boots on gravel and bark commands. Mac joined the formation for the mandatory 5-mile run, positioning herself in the middle of the pack, watching, assessing. By mile 3, half the men were struggling to maintain pace. By mile 4, she had moved steadily forward, her breathing controlled, her stride economical. When they finished, she had outrun more than half the unit without showing signs of strain. Major Robert Mitchell, the head training instructor, noticed. He was a solid wall of a man with close-cropped hair and arms corded with muscle. His eyes narrowed as she completed the run. "Not showing off, are you, Lieutenant?" he asked the question, carrying an edge. "No, sir. Just keeping pace," she replied, her voice neutral. Mitchell studied her for a moment longer, then turned away with a grunt. But the seed had been planted. She wasn't what they expected. At the firing range later that day, Mac took her position with practiced ease. The M4 carbine felt like an extension of her body, familiar and balanced. When the targets appeared, she fired with surgical precision, hitting center mass with mechanical consistency. The range officer called a ceasefire and brought the targets forward. The other soldiers glanced at her scores, then at each other. This wasn't beginner's luck. Every shot had formed a tight grouping, dead center, the kind of shooting that came from thousands of hours of practice and natural talent. "Ever qualify as marksman, Lieutenant?" Mitchell asked, examining her target. "Yes, sir." "Expert rating?" "Yes, sir." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "What's your preference, M4, M24? "I'm proficient with most NATO standard issue weapons, sir. Prefer the Mk12 SPR for precision work. Better barrel harmonics reduce thermal shift during sustained fire." The technical specificity of her answer silenced further questions. Mitchell nodded curtly and moved on, but not before Mac noticed the faint crease between his eyebrows, the look of a man recalibrating his assessment. During gear drills, she dismantled and rebuilt her weapon faster than anyone else in her group, including the instructors. Her fingers moved with the muscle memory of someone who had performed the task 1,000 times before, often under far worse conditions than a training exercise. "Where'd you learn to handle weapons like that, Lieutenant?" a young sergeant named Davis asked during a brief water break. "My father," she answered simply. "He believed in being prepared." The truth was more complicated. Her father had indeed taught her the basics, but the refinement, the speed, the precision had come later in places that didn't exist on any map, under instructors whose names never appeared on any roster. By the end of the week, Mac had earned begrudging respect from some of the rank and file. Others remained skeptical, but the outright hostility had faded to cautious observation. The tension didn't go unnoticed. Colonel Harrington observed everything from the edge of the field, Arms crossed his face unreadable behind aviator sunglasses that reflected the harsh Texas sun. In his office that evening, Harrington studied her file again, this time more carefully. Lieutenant Mackenzie Blackwood, West Point graduate, top 5% of her class, distinguished service in Afghanistan, and then gaps. Periods of her service record redacted or simply missing. Assignment histories that ended abruptly, followed by months of nothing, then new assignments with no explanation for the transitions. Her psychological profile noted exceptional stress resilience and above-average adaptability to isolated conditions. Her marksmanship scores were nearly perfect. Her physical fitness evaluations consistently exceeded maximum standards. None of this explained why a soldier with her qualifications had been sent to his training facility, a place designed to forge special operations candidates, not house those who were already elite. Harrington closed the file, removed his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Something wasn't adding up, and in his experience, discrepancies usually meant trouble. Friday afternoon brought a sudden change in routine. The announcement came over the loudspeakers, cutting through the dry air. All personnel, full uniform inspection, 1,600 hours parade ground, mandatory attendance. The timing was odd. Inspections weren't usually unannounced and rarely held outside in the brutal heat of late afternoon. Soldiers grumbled as they lined up in formation, tugging at collars already damp with sweat. Mac stood at the front, directly in view of Harrington and the command staff. This wasn't about discipline. She suspected this was theater, and she was meant to be the main attraction. When she arrived, the murmurs began again. The other soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Some of them smirked. They knew something was off. So did she. The entire setup reeked of control, of spectacle. Harrington walked the line slowly, eyes sharp, stopping only briefly at each soldier. His inspection notes were minor: a scuffed boot, here a crooked name tape there. Then he reached Mac. He paused longer than necessary, his gaze lingering like a challenge. "Lieutenant Blackwood," he said, his voice calm but carrying sharp undertones. "Step forward." She did, maintaining perfect posture. "You've had an eventful first week." "Yes, sir." "Let's see if you understand regulation." His eyes hardened. "Remove your blouse." There was a long pause. A few heads turned sharply. Mac blinked, momentarily stunned. "Sir," she asked, her voice level. He didn't blink. "You heard me. Field regulation calls for proper layered uniform presentation. Take off your blouse so we can verify." The yard was silent now. Even the birds had gone quiet. Sweat trickled down her back, not from nerves but from rage. She knew exactly what this was. Not regulation, not training, just humiliation. But she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Slowly, Mac reached for the top button of her uniform blouse. Her fingers were steady. She undid one, then two, then three. Whispers rippled through the ranks. Button by button, Mac unfastened her blouse as 180 soldiers stood frozen in silence. No one laughed. No one even moved. The tension on the parade ground was thick enough to slice with a bayonet. When the blouse opened, she pulled it from her shoulders, folded it neatly over her arm, and stood at attention in her olive green undershirt, her ranks still clearly visible on the collar tabs. Her posture was perfect. Her chin lifted. She gave them nothing. No shame, no fear. Behind his aviators, Colonel Harrington's expression was unreadable. He stared at her shoulder. Then he opened his mouth to continue the inspection, but his words never came. A dark tattoo peeked out from beneath her short sleeve. At first glance, it was just black ink against tan skin. But as he looked closer, the details emerged: as sharply inked eagle wings, outstretched in a battle dive. 3 arrows clutched in its talons. A coded series of numbers encircling the stark design like a seal. The moment Harrington caught sight of it, he stiffened. His mouth closed, and a hushed murmur rolled across the formation. "Wait, is that?" someone whispered. Another voice, low and cautious, replied, "That's the mark of Talon." Harrington took one step closer, his boots crunching in the gravel. He removed his sunglasses, and his face, now visible, had turned pale. His eyes locked on the tattoo, not with curiosity, but with something dangerously close to fear. He knew what it meant. So did a handful of the older NCOs in the back ranks. Talon wasn't a legend. It was a classified ghost unit. Special operations operatives trained in deep recon urban warfare survival under zero support and silent extraction. The missions never made the news. Many weren't even debriefed. Those who made it through Talon training rarely spoke of it. Most didn't survive long enough to retire. The tattoo wasn't a decoration. It was a signature, a mark given only to those who completed its final mission. Not training, but a live operation where mistakes weren't corrected, they were buried. Harrington knew because years ago during his desk job at Pentagon West, he'd signed a denial letter to transfer someone into Talon, a male captain. That was the last time he'd heard of the unit. But now standing before him, a female lieutenant bore the tattoo silently, and that changed everything. He turned toward the rest of the unit, suddenly aware of every watching eye. The silence had deepened. No one cracked a joke. No one dared. The same soldiers who'd rolled their eyes at her arrival now stood stiffly uncertain. Harrington cleared his throat. "Inspection dismissed," he said, voice lower than usual. No one moved. Then he added louder, "You're all dismissed. Return to your assignments." And the soldiers broke formation, whispering, side-glancing, many throwing looks back at Mac as she silently refastened her blouse. Harrington turned to leave but paused. "Blackwood with me." He didn't wait for a reply. He walked toward the command building with a faster pace than usual. Mac followed without speaking. Inside his office, Harrington shut the door behind her. The room was dim, a fan buzzing overhead, stirring papers on the meticulously organized desk. He removed his glasses, sat behind the desk, and laced his fingers together. "You weren't supposed to be here," he said finally. "I was assigned here," Mac replied. He nodded slowly. "By who?" "You know I can't say." "And that tattoo," her lips barely moved, "earned it." He exhaled through his nose. "I've read about Talon, enough to know what kind of hell you had to go through." He paused. "You could have just said something." Mac's eyes didn't waver. "You didn't ask." Harrington stared at her a moment longer, then leaned back in his chair. "Do you know what kind of storm you've stirred up here?" "I didn't stir it," she replied calmly. "You did." His face hardened, but even in his glare, there was something else. A flicker of respect he didn't want to admit. "You're dismissed," he muttered. She nodded once, then left. Outside, the atmosphere had changed. Mitchell no longer smirked when she walked by. A few younger soldiers gave subtle nods of respect. Others avoided her, completely unsure what to think. In the barracks, someone had cleaned up the chalk insult that had been scrolled on her door earlier that week. She said nothing about the tattoo. She didn't need to. Its presence had done more in a few seconds than months of training could have. Still, she kept her focus, ran harder, drilled longer, spoke less, but the whispers continued. Late one night, two soldiers sat near the fire pit, voices low as they watched her walk past. "I thought Talon was disbanded." "It was, but she has the mark." "You think it's real?" She didn't deny it, did she? And when Mac disappeared into the shadows near the obstacle course, the only thing they were sure of was this: they were no longer watching someone trying to prove herself. They were watching someone who already had and had chosen to keep quiet about it. That silence was louder than any speech. 2 days passed, but the silence didn't fade. Mac walked through camp with measured steps, her uniform crisp, her expression unreadable. The soldiers around her had shifted. They still watched her, but not with mockery. Now it was caution, some with awe, a few with quiet resentment. Major Mitchell had gone noticeably quiet. He no longer barked at her during drills. Instead, he watched hawk-eyed, waiting for something to slip. Colonel Harrington hadn't spoken to her since the inspection, but something in him had changed. She could feel it, like a man who'd seen a ghost and wasn't sure whether to salute or run. But the friction in the unit hadn't gone. It had only mutated. One afternoon after a field exercise, Mac entered the mess hall. A group of soldiers fell quiet as she passed. One whispered just loud enough to hear, "She probably got that tattoo at a damn biker shop." The others chuckled. She ignored it, filled her tray, and sat alone facing the window. She'd learned long ago that responding to provocation rarely improved the situation. Reaction was weakness. Control was strength. That evening, Harrington called another assembly. No warning, no explanation, just full unit turnout, parade ground, Class A uniforms, 1,800 hours. This wasn't training protocol. Something else was coming. When the troops lined up in the burning twilight, the air felt heavy, like a storm on the edge of breaking. Mac arrived in her formal uniform, spotless, every button gleaming. Her cap with square boots, polished to a mirror shine. She stood dead center, row 2. Harrington approached the front, clipboard in hand. "This unit," he began, has long stood on discipline, on order, on example. But there are standards to uphold. His voice was louder now. His speech had rhythm. Uniform integrity is not optional. Some soldiers arrive with unusual backgrounds. They may think themselves exempt from review, but we do not play favorites. We correct everyone publicly if needed. He turned, pointed at Mac. Step forward, Lieutenant Blackwood. She stepped forward without hesitation. This is the same soldier who removed her combat blouse earlier this week. He paced slowly in front of her. While some of you might be enchanted by stories or inked fairy tales, I care about regulation. Mac's jaw clenched, but her posture remained perfect. Again, he said, remove your blouse. Regulation check. The air cracked with tension. This time it wasn't just about humiliation. He was pushing her, daring her, hoping she'd break protocol or disobey. He wanted her to crack in front of everyone. But she didn't. Without a word, Mac unbuttoned the top of her Class A blouse. She removed it, revealing the regulation-issued undershirt beneath. Her tattoo sat squarely on her right shoulder, impossible to miss in the fading light. A ripple ran through the crowd. Even those who had mocked her fell silent. Harrington stepped forward slowly. He stared at the tattoo again, as if trying to convince himself it wasn't real. She wears a mark not listed in her file, he said, a mark associated with a program that officially does not exist. Then something unexpected happened. From the back of the crowd, a voice cut through the stillness. It exists. Every head turned. It was Master Sergeant Frank Thompson, the grizzled veteran who rarely spoke during assemblies. At 74, he was the oldest active duty soldier on base, a living relic kept on as a trainer and advisor. His leathery face was a map of decades of service, from Vietnam to more recent conflicts. Harrington blinked. Excuse me. Thompson walked forward. His own sleeves rolled just enough to reveal the top edge of the same eagle tattoo, though faded and scarred. I saw that ink last in '93 in Mogadishu, he said, his voice carrying the weight of hard truth. We lost 7 men before that evac. One of them carried that bird on his shoulder. They got us out anyway. He looked directly at Mac. She didn't steal that ink. The crowd murmured. Harrington's composure slipped. I didn't authorize this, he muttered. No one authorizes Talon, Thompson said. That's the point. Harrington took a step back. Dismissed, he snapped. But it was too late. The damage was done. Mac refastened her blouse, slowly, eyes forward. As she walked back to formation, the soldiers beside her didn't move. They didn't speak, but something had shifted permanently. Harrington turned and marched off the field without another word. Back in her bunk that night, Mac stared at the ceiling, arms crossed under her head. She didn't feel victorious. She felt tired. Exposing the tattoo was never her plan, but now it was out. And that meant things were only going to get harder because now everyone knew she wasn't ordinary. And not everyone likes a reminder that the world is full of people who've done the impossible and survived. She glanced at her father's photograph on the small metal desk. Colonel Michael Blackwood had died a hero's death, leading his men through a sandstorm in Afghanistan that had concealed an enemy position. She had joined the military to honor his memory, to continue his legacy. But now she understood that legacy ran deeper than she had ever known. The eagle tattoo on her shoulder seemed to burn again, not with pain, but with purpose. Her path forward was clear now, illuminated by the shadows of the past. Whatever came next, she was ready. She always had been. By morning, word of Mac's tattoo had spread through Fort Westridge faster than any official bulletin ever could. Not just that she had it, but that Thompson had confirmed it, validated it with his own faded mark. The unit no longer debated if it was real. They debated what it meant. The dining hall fell silent when she entered for breakfast. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Eyes followed her movement across the room. Where there had once been skepticism or scorn, now there was tension, the kind that comes from proximity to something dangerous and unknown. Mac collected her tray and sat alone as she always did. She ate methodically, giving them nothing to observe beyond her usual efficiency. But she felt the weight of their stares on her shoulders, heavier than any rucksack she'd ever carried. The tattoo that had been her private reminder of duty and sacrifice was now a public spectacle, a mystery for them to unravel. After breakfast, she was scheduled to run drills with 2nd Platoon. When she arrived at the training field, Major Mitchell was already there, clipboard in hand, sunglasses hiding his eyes. But his posture had changed. The casual contempt was gone, replaced by something stiffer, more formal. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Major," she replied. He handed her the day's schedule. "Colonel wants you to take point on the tactical exercise." It wasn't a request she'd expected. Taking point meant leadership authority over the exercise. Just yesterday, Mitchell had relegated her to rear security, the military equivalent of keeping her out of the way. "Understood," she said, accepting the clipboard. Mitchell hesitated, then spoke in a lower voice. "That thing on your shoulder, is it what they say it is?" Mac met his gaze steadily. "What do they say it is, sir?" "That you're one of them, Talon." She didn't answer immediately. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training field, and in the distance she could see the soldiers of 2nd Platoon assembling for the day's exercise. "I have my orders, Major. Same as you." It wasn't an answer, but it was all he was going to get. Mitchell nodded once, understanding the boundaries she'd established. He moved off to supervise another group, leaving her alone with the clipboard and the weight of unspoken truths. The tactical exercise went smoothly. Too smoothly. The men followed her instructions with a precision and attentiveness they'd never shown before. There was no grumbling, no subtle resistance, no testing of her authority. They moved when she said move, stopped when she said stop, executed each maneuver with textbook compliance. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt hollow. They weren't following Lieutenant Blackwood. They were following the myth of Talon, the specter of something they didn't understand, but suddenly feared. Real respect couldn't be tattooed onto skin. It had to be earned day by day, decision by decision. At midday, a summons arrived. Colonel Harrington wanted to see her immediately. Mac found him in his office, standing by the window looking out at the sprawling base. The room was cooler than the Texas heat outside, but tension made the air feel thick and difficult to breathe. "Close the door," he said without turning. She did, then stood at attention, waiting. Harrington turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here." "You mentioned that yesterday, sir." "I'm not talking about this base. I'm talking about being visible, being known." He moved to his desk and sat heavily. "Talon operative bees don't walk around in the open. They don't join regular training units. They don't expose themselves to scrutiny." "I was assigned here," she repeated. "By who?" His voice rose slightly. "Who pulls the strings that put someone like you in my command?" Mac remained silent, her face impassive. Harrington's frustration showed in the tightening of his jaw. "I've been making calls, reaching out to old contacts. No one will talk about Talon, not even to confirm it still exists. But they all get very quiet when I mention your name." Still, she said nothing. "I need to know what's happening on my base, Lieutenant. I need to know why you're really here." Mac considered her options carefully. Harrington wasn't going to let this go. The exposure of her tattoo had forced a confrontation she'd hoped to avoid, but perhaps it was inevitable. Sometimes shadows needed to be acknowledged before they could be properly utilized. She reached into the side pocket of her uniform and placed a small sealed envelope on his desk. Harrington eyed it suspiciously. "What's this authorization code?" Max said quietly. "One-time use access. Temporary clearance for 10 minutes from General Montgomery." Harrington's eyebrows raised. "Montgomery 4-Star Joint Special Ops Command." She nodded. He opened the envelope, slowly reading the code written in careful black ink. Then he stood, walked to the secure computer terminal in the corner and typed it in. What followed was 10 minutes of utter silence. Harrington read the files, his face growing increasingly pale and drawn. One mission in Syria, another in Venezuela, an extraction in North Korea, names removed from every press record. Covert operations, kill zone ratios, footage of enemy forces being neutralized with surgical precision in the dead of night. No backup, no air support. And there, buried in the final page, a report signed off with only a code name, Phantom. He looked back at her. "That's you." Mac nodded once. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, rubbing his face with both hands. "The embassy extraction last year. That was you." "My team," she corrected. 6 operators, 37 hostages secured, 23 hostiles neutralized. Harrington stood up, rubbing the back of his neck. "Why the hell are you even here? You should be commanding Black Ops, not babysitting trainees." "I asked to come here," she said. Harrington blinked. "Why pas? Because this is where the next leaders are made, and I want to see if any of them are worth it." A heavy silence filled the room as Harrington processed this information. He walked back to his desk and sat now, looking at her not as an outsider, but as something closer to an equal. You could have let the rumor fade, he said finally. Instead, you stood your ground and let them see it. They needed to, she replied. Not for me, for them. He studied her a moment. What happens now? I keep doing my job. From that day, Harrington's attitude shifted not with dramatic speeches or sudden warmth, but in subtle ways. He called her by rank in staff meetings, invited her input during strategy sessions, assigned her to co-lead high-risk drills. The soldiers noticed, and so did Mitchell. One afternoon after PT, Mitchell approached her at the hydration station. I didn't believe it at first, he admitted, but I've seen enough now to know it's true. Mac wiped sweat from her brow and said nothing. He swallowed. You're not what I expected, Lieutenant. Few things ever are, Major. Mitchell nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. The Colonel wants you to take over Delta Company starting tomorrow. Mac raised an eyebrow. Delta Company was the unit's problem child, a collection of underperformers, reassignment misfits, and disciplinary cases. The place where careers went to die. That's not a request, Mitchell added. It's an opportunity. I understand, she said. As Mitchell walked away, Master Sergeant Thompson approached, his weathered face creased in a knowing smile. Delta Company, huh? Harrington's testing you. Or setting me up to fail, Mac replied. Thompson chuckled. Maybe, but you're not the failing type, are you, Lieutenant? He fell into step beside her as they walked toward the barracks. Mind if I ask you something about the tattoo? She gave a small nod. When did you get it? The eagle. 3 years ago, after Gaddafi. Thompson's eyes widened slightly. The embassy hostage situation that was never confirmed to be Talon. It wasn't, she said simply. He understood what she wasn't saying. Some operations remain ghosts even within the shadow world of special forces. Your father, Thompson said carefully. Colonel Blackwood, did he know about what you really do? Mac's face softened almost imperceptibly. No, he died thinking I was just another officer in Afghanistan. Would he have been proud if he'd known? She considered this for a moment. He always said the measure of a soldier isn't in the medals they wear, but in the lives they save when no one's watching. Thompson nodded, satisfied with the answer. Delta Company assembles at 0500. They're not going to make it easy for you. Good, Mac replied. Nothing worth doing ever is. No. Delta Company lived down to its reputation from the first morning. When Mac arrived at 0455, only half the unit was present and in formation. The rest straggled in over the next 15 minutes, some still adjusting their uniforms, others making no effort to hide their disdain for the early hour. She observed them without comment, noting each face, each attitude, each subtle sign of resistance or compliance. 42 men total, a mix of ranks and backgrounds, united only by their reputation as the base's least effective unit. When the last soldier finally joined the ranks, Mac stepping forward. My name is Lieutenant Blackwood. As of this morning, I'm your new commanding officer. A few snickers rippled through the formation. One voice from the back muttered something about diversity hires. She ignored it. You have exactly 30 seconds to get into proper formation. They stared at her, disbelieving. 25 seconds. Slowly, reluctantly, they began adjusting their positions. 10 seconds. The pace quickened, but not enough. Time's up, she announced. Since proper formation appears to be a challenge, we'll practice it for the next hour. Groans erupted from the ranks. That's now 2 hours, she said calmly. Would anyone like to go for 3? Silence fell across the field. For the next 2 hours, Delta Company practiced basic formation drills under the rising Texas sun. No water breaks, no rest periods, just the endless repetition of form alignment and discipline that they should have mastered years ago. By the time she dismissed them for breakfast, every man was soaked in sweat, legs trembling from standing at attention for so long. They stumbled toward the mess hall, casting resentful glances back at their new CO, who hadn't even broken a sweat. That was just day 1, she called after them. Tomorrow we start at 0430. Over the days that followed, Mac pushed Delta Company harder than they'd ever been pushed before. Pre-dawn runs in full gear, combat drills in the hottest part of the day, night navigation exercises when other units were sleeping. She was relentless, demanding, unyielding, but never arbitrary. Every task had a purpose. Every hardship came with a lesson. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Delta Company began to change. First came the punctuality. By the end of week 1, every soldier was in formation 5 minutes before the required time. Then came the cohesion, the gradual shift from individual complaints to collective determination. By the middle of week 2, they'd started calling themselves Shadow Company when they thought she couldn't hear. During a particularly brutal obstacle course drill, one of the younger sergeants collapsed from heat exhaustion. Before Mac could react, 3 of his squad mates had already moved to assist him, working together with the synchronized efficiency of a veteran unit. She watched, saying nothing but noting the transformation with quiet satisfaction. That evening, as she was reviewing performance reports in her quarters, a knock came at her door. It was Thompson, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering her one. "Word is you've been running Delta ragged." She accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. They had potential. It was just buried under bad habits. Thompson eased himself into the chair across from her, his joints protesting the movement. "They're calling themselves Shadow Company now. Did you know that? I've heard. They think it's because of the tattoo, because of Talon." Max sipped her coffee. "Let them think what they want as long as they perform." Thompson studied her for a moment. "You know, most officers would use this assignment as a stepping stone. Turn around a failing unit, get the recognition, move up the ladder. But that's not why you're here, is it?" She met his gaze. "What makes you say that?" "Because I've worn the Eagle too, Lieutenant. I know what it means to serve in the shadows." He set his mug down. "You're looking for something, or someone." Mac didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. "Have you ever heard of Alexander Volkov?" she asked finally. Thompson's expression darkened. "Russian intelligence. Cold War era, but rumored to still be active." "Why?" "Just curious," she said, her voice carefully neutral. Thompson wasn't fooled. "Lieutenant, if you're tracking Volkov, you're playing with fire. That man has more blood on his hands than most warlords." "I'm aware of his reputation." "It's not just reputation. I encountered his handiwork once in '89, a safe house in Berlin. 3 operators tortured for information, then executed. Clean, professional, methodical." Thompson's eyes had taken on a distant look, revisiting memories he'd rather forget. "Volkov doesn't just kill, he sends messages." Mac nodded, absorbing this confirmation of what she already knew. "Thank you for the coffee, Sergeant." Thompson recognized the dismissal, but hesitated at the door. "Whatever you're involved in, Lieutenant, watch your back. And remember, even eagles need a flock sometimes." After he left, Mac pulled out the small notebook she kept locked in her footlocker. She added Thompson's account to the growing collection of intelligence she'd been gathering, pieces of a puzzle that was slowly taking shape. 2 Talon operators dead in the past month. Both deaths ruled accidents. Both bodies bearing signs of interrogation before death. Both men had served in the same operational window as Mac, though on different teams. Someone was hunting Talon operators, and the trail was leading closer to Fort Westridge with each passing day. The following week, a visitor arrived at the base. Marcus Wolf introduced himself as a journalist for Military Review, a respected publication covering armed forces operations and training. His credentials appeared legitimate. His questions seemed standard. But something about his interest in the base's special training programs set off alarm bells in Mac's mind. She observed him from a distance as he interviewed various officers and NCOs, careful to keep her own profile low. But on the 3rd day of his visit, as she was leading Shadow Company through a tactical exercise, she noticed him watching from the edge of the field, his attention focused specifically on her. Later that afternoon, he approached her directly. "Lieutenant Blackwood, I was hoping we could talk about your training methods. I've heard remarkable things about the turnaround you've achieved with Delta Company." "No comment," she replied, continuing her walk toward the command building. He fell into step beside her. "I'm particularly interested in your background. West Point, Afghanistan, and then, well, that's where things get interesting. A lot of blank spaces in your service record." Max stopped and faced him. "Mr. Wolf, I have no interest in being interviewed. If you want information about this base's training programs, talk to public affairs." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "What about Talon, Lieutenant? Would public affairs know about that too?" The name hung in the air between them like a challenge. Mac's expression remained neutral, but internally her threat assessment had just escalated from cautious to critical. I don't know what you're talking about, she said evenly. I think you do. Wolf's voice dropped lower. Just like I think you know about the deaths of Captain Eric Holloway in Montana and Major David Chen in Virginia. Both ruled accidents, both carrying a certain tattoo. Mac felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Those names hadn't been released publicly. Their connection to Talon was classified at the highest levels. You should be careful about making unfounded connections, Mr. Wolf. It could be seen as irresponsible journalism. He leaned closer. Or it could be seen as the story of the decade. America's Ghost Warriors, the truth about Talon. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Before she could respond, Colonel Harrington's voice cut through the tension. Lieutenant Blackwood, a word. Wolf straightened his professional demeanor, sliding back into place. Another time, perhaps, he said, then nodded respectfully to Harrington before walking away. Harrington watched him go, his expression grim. My office, now. Once inside with the door firmly closed, Harrington didn't mince words. That man is not who he claims to be. I gathered that, sir. Thompson recognized him. Says he's asking questions about things no civilian journalist would know to ask about. Operations code names specific missions that never made the official record. Mac nodded. He mentioned Holloway and Chen to me. Both Talon, both recently deceased. Harrington's face paled slightly. How would he know that? That's what concerns me, sir. Harrington moved to his desk and pulled out a secure phone. I'm calling in some favors. In the meantime, keep your distance from him, and warn Thompson to do the same. The next morning, Wolf's credentials were revoked. 2 MPs escorted him from the base, but not before he managed one final exchange with Mac, who had witnessed his departure from across the parade ground. This isn't over, Phantom, he called out using her operational code name. The use of that name sent ice through her veins. No one should have known that designation outside the highest echelons of military command. Harrington called an emergency meeting with Mac and Thompson that evening. They gathered in the colonel's office blinds, drawn the only light coming from a desk lamp that cast long shadows across the walls. Wolf is ex-CIA, Harrington said without preamble. Discharged in 2008. Reason classified. Why is he after Talon? Mac asked. Not just Talon, you. Harrington slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a photograph of a man Mac recognized immediately. Broken nose scar above his left eye, cold eyes that seemed to calculate rather than see. Her heart stopped. Alexander Volkov. Thompson looked between them. Who's Volkov? Russian intelligence, Harrington explained. Specialized in counter-operations against Western special forces. He was at Gaddafi, Mac added. The embassy extraction. We crossed paths. He didn't walk away happy. He's been looking for you ever since, Harrington continued. And according to my source, he's connected to Wolf. They're working together. Why would an ex-CIA operative work with Russian intelligence? Thompson asked. Money revenge ideology. Take your pick, Harrington replied. The point is, they're not after a story, they're after names, operations, methods. And I just painted a target on Fort Westridge, Max said quietly. Harrington nodded. We need to prepare. The next morning, Mac gathered Shadow Company. She didn't tell them everything, but she told them enough. We're going to be running a new kind of drill, she announced. Real-world security protocols, not for a grade, for keeps. Mitchell stood beside her, arms crossed. You heard the lieutenant. This isn't a game anymore. The soldiers exchanged glances, but didn't question. They'd learned to trust her. Mac divided them into security teams, established new access protocols, and set up a rotating watch. To most of the base, it looked like an extended training exercise. Only Harrington, Thompson, Mitchell, and Mac knew the truth. Fort Westridge was preparing for an infiltration, but the preparation revealed something unexpected. While reviewing the base's structural plans, Mac discovered an anomaly, a section of the old administration building that didn't match current layouts, a space that shouldn't exist. Colonel, she said, pointing to the blueprint spread across his desk. What's this area here? Harrington frowned. Storage. Been sealed up for decades. According to these plans, it's twice as large as it should be. That night, Mac, Harrington, and Thompson used the colonel's master key to access the sealed wing of the administration building. Dust lay thick on the floor, undisturbed for years. Their flashlights cut through darkness that felt solid, revealing abandoned offices, frozen in time typewriters on desks, Calendar still showing June 1972. What was this place? Mac asked, her voice hushed. Before my time, Harrington admitted. But based on the era, I'd guess it was connected to intelligence operations during Vietnam. They moved deeper into the abandoned section. At the end of a long corridor, they found a heavy metal door with a combination lock that looked newer than its surroundings. Someone's been here, Thompson observed, pointing to faint footprints in the dust. Harrington tried his master key. Nothing. This wasn't in any inventory I received when I took command. Mac examined the lock closely. This is a titanium 7 DoD issue, circa 2000. Someone's been maintaining this door. Can you open it? Harrington asked. She smiled faintly. They don't put these on doors. They don't mind people opening. She pulled a small kit from her pocket. But yes. 5 minutes later, the lock clicked. The door swung open with a groan of protest, revealing a room filled with filing cabinets and a single desk. On the wall hung a faded emblem, an eagle with arrows in its talons, surrounded by 13 stars. My God, Thompson whispered. This is a Shadow Hunters archive. Shadow Hunters, Mac asked. Vietnam-era special operations. The original template for programs like Talon. Harrington moved to the filing cabinets. He tried one drawer locked. Whatever's in here, someone wanted it preserved but forgotten. They spent hours going through what files they could access. Names, operations, dates, a hidden history of America's shadow wars. And there in a folder marked Continuity, they found something that stopped them cold. A list of program code names, Shadow Hunters Black Echo, Silent Step, Talon. They're all connected, Mac realized. Different names, different eras, same purpose. Harrington held up a photograph. A group of men standing before a hangar, faces blurred by time and poor image quality. But on the shoulder of one just visible was the eagle tattoo. This goes back further than any of us knew, he said quietly. Thompson nodded. And someone else knows about this room. Someone who's been here recently. As they were preparing to leave, Mac's flashlight caught something, a small black box tucked beneath the desk. Inside was a modern satellite phone and a notebook filled with what appeared to be surveillance notes. The most recent entry was dated 3 days ago. Wolf, Mac said. He's been using this as a blind. Not just Wolf, Harrington replied, flipping through the notebook. Look at these notes. Multiple observers, multiple shifts. They've been watching us for weeks. But why? Thompson asked. What's so important about Fort Westridge? The answer came to Mac suddenly. It's not about the base, it's about legacy. She pointed to the files. These programs, they're all connected by more than purpose. They're connected by people, mentors, trainees, family. Harrington's expression changed as understanding dawned. The next generation. Exactly, Mac confirmed. They're not after old secrets. They're after the new carriers of those secrets. They're after you, Thompson said, and anyone you've trained. The discovery changed everything. The next morning, Harrington called in additional security, but kept the reason classified. To the base at large, it was just an elevated security drill. To Shadow Company, it was deadly serious. Mac increased their training intensity, now focusing on counter-surveillance extraction techniques and close-quarters combat. The soldiers responded with a focus and determination that surprised even her. They weren't just following orders anymore. They were defending something they believed in. Mitchell approached her after a particularly grueling session. You knew this might happen, didn't you, when you took command of Delta Company? She didn't answer directly. I knew my presence would have consequences. You could have requested a transfer, protected yourself. She looked at him squarely and left them unprepared. That's not leadership, Major. That's self-preservation. He nodded slowly. You're training us to replace you. I'm training you to survive me, she corrected. Meanwhile, Wolf had not been idle. A new article appeared online, Shadow Warriors America's Undisclosed Combat Forces. It didn't name names or reveal specific operations, but it hinted at enough to make intelligence officers nervous. More concerning, it mentioned Fort Westridge as a training ground for the next generation of deniable operators. Harrington was furious. He's painting a target on every soldier here. That's the point, Mac replied. Force our hand, make us react. Well, it's working, the colonel admitted. I've got brass breathing down my neck, demanding to know what the hell is going on. What did you tell them? As little as possible, he sighed. But we're running out of time and options. The situation escalated further when Thompson discovered a listening device in the officer's mess. Sweeps revealed more in the barracks, the command center, even Harrington's office. Someone had thoroughly compromised base security. We need to flush them out, Max said during a secure meeting held in the motor pool, surrounded by the noise of engines to mask their conversation. How? Harrington asked. We don't know who we're looking for. Yes, we do, she replied. We're looking for someone who knows too much, so let's give them something they can't resist. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would create a false intelligence leak word of a special briefing about Talon operations to be held in the secure conference room. The only people who would know it was a trap would be Mac, Harrington, Thompson, and Mitchell. What about Shadow Company? Mitchell asked. They'll be our backup, Mac explained, but they can't know the details. The leak has to look real. The trap was set. Word spread through carefully planted conversations and misplaced documents. The briefing was scheduled for midnight 48 hours later. As the appointed time approached, tension on the base ratcheted higher. Shadow Company was positioned strategically disguised as routine night patrols. Mac, Harrington, and Thompson took their places in the conference room. A folder of fake documents was conspicuously placed on the table. You think this will work? Thompson asked. If I were hunting Talon secrets, this would be too good to pass up, Mac replied. They waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. Nothing. Maybe they didn't bite, Harrington suggested. Then the lights went out. Emergency generators kicked in seconds later, but in that brief darkness, they heard the distinct click of the door lock engaging. They're here, Mac whispered, her hand moving to the sidearm concealed beneath the table. The night had just begun, and the hunters were about to become the hunted. The explosion tore through the night with a thunderous roar, shattering windows and sending shockwaves across Fort Westridge. Delta Company's barracks erupted into a fireball that illuminated the darkness, flames reaching hungrily toward the star-filled Texas sky. Emergency sirens wailed as soldiers poured from adjacent buildings, some still pulling on uniforms, others rushing to grab fire equipment. Max sprinted toward the inferno, heart hammering against her ribs. The heat slammed into her like a physical wall as she approached, scanning desperately for any sign of casualties. Mitchell intercepted her face, streaked with sweat and soot. Everyone's accounted for, he shouted over the chaos. Night training exercise. We were at the obstacle course when it happened. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by cold realization. You changed the schedule. Mitchell nodded grimly. Last-minute decision. Thought we'd try something different. That decision had saved lives. The barracks that should have held 42 sleeping men now stood empty, consumed by flames that devoured bunks, foot lockers, and personal belongings. Not a training accident or equipment malfunction. This was a message written in fire. Colonel Harrington appeared beside them, his face carved from stone. Security footage, he said, thrusting a tablet into Mac's hands. The night vision image showed a figure moving with a practiced efficiency along the exterior wall of the barracks. Male, medium-build face obscured by a tactical mask. But the way he moved, fluid, precise, economical, told Mac everything she needed to know. Volkov, she said quietly. Harrington's jaw tightened. He's here, on my base. Not anymore, Mac replied. This was a hit and run. He's already gone. By dawn, the fire had been contained, leaving behind the charred skeleton of the building. Fort Westridge was placed under highest security protocol. All leaves canceled, all personnel confined to base armed patrols doubled. The official explanation cited a security exercise, but rumors spread quickly. Something had changed. Something dangerous had arrived. In Harrington's office, a sweep revealed 3 more listening devices hidden in air vents behind picture frames inside a desk lamp. The colonel's secure communications, Amran, had been compromised for weeks, possibly months. He's been 3 steps ahead of us the entire time, Harrington said, his voice heavy with the weight of realization. Max studied the collection of tiny surveillance equipment laid out on the desk. Military grade, but modified, the kind of custom tools used by high-level intelligence operatives. This isn't just about me anymore, she said. He's targeting Shadow Company. The next generation. Thompson, who had been silent until now, spoke from his position by the window. It's worse than that. He's destroying your legacy before it can take root. The intercom on Harrington's desk buzzed. Colonel General Montgomery is on secure line 1. Harrington exchanged a glance with Mac before answering. Put him through. General Robert Montgomery's voice filled the room, clipped and authoritative. Harrington, I'm looking at satellite images of a burning barracks on your base. Want to tell me what the hell is going on? Security breach, sir. We have reason to believe Alexander Volkov has infiltrated Fort Westridge. A heavy silence. Then, you're certain it's Volkov? Positive identification from security footage, General. Another pause. I'll be there in 3 hours. Secure a landing zone. And Harrington, is Blackwood with you? Yes, sir. Keep her there. Montgomery out. The line went dead. Harrington looked up at Mac, his expression grim. I guess the brass is taking this seriously. They should, she replied. Volkov isn't just a rogue operative. He's a ghost from the Cold War, trained in our methods, who knows our weaknesses. And he wants to burn everything to the ground. General Montgomery arrived precisely 3 hours later, descending from a Black Hawk helicopter in full-dress uniform, flanked by 4 security personnel who scanned the landing zone with practiced eyes. At 63, Montgomery was lean and sharp, with close-cropped silver hair and the ramrod-straight posture of a career soldier. His weathered face betrayed nothing as he strode across the tarmac to where Harrington, Mack, and Thompson waited at attention. Colonel, he acknowledged with a curt nod. Lieutenant, Sergeant. His gaze lingered on Thompson, recognition flickering briefly. Been a long time, Frank. Yes, sir, since Mogadishu. Montgomery's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. Let's continue this inside. In Harrington's office, now swept clean of surveillance devices, Montgomery dismissed his security detail and closed the door. His demeanor shifted subtly, the formal general giving way to something more direct, more dangerous. Volkov, he said without preamble. Talk to me. Mac stepped on forward. He's hunting talent operators, sir. Captain Holloway in Montana, Major Chen in Virginia. Now he's here. Why what? Revenge initially. The Gaddafi operation, I encountered him during the embassy extraction. We left him diminished. Montgomery raised an eyebrow. Wounded his reputation, sir. He lost 7 men, failed his objective. In his world, that's worse than death. And you think he's expanded his target list to include Shadow Company? It wasn't a question, but Mac answered anyway. Yes, sir. He's not just eliminating operators now. He's trying to destroy the program itself, past, present, and future. Montgomery considered this, his fingers drumming lightly on Harrington's desk. We've discovered something else. Wolf, the journalist, he's been transmitting classified information about Special Operations Force to multiple outlets. If Volkov has access to those same channels, he'd have a complete operational picture, Harrington finished. Names, locations, methodologies. Precisely. Montgomery looked directly at Mac. Lieutenant, I'm authorizing a countermeasure. Codename Eagle Trap. Mac straightened imperceptibly. Parameters, sir. We feed false intelligence through channels we know are compromised. A gathering of former Special Operations personnel, including several known talent operators. The location, a decommissioned training facility in the Appalachian Mountains. Officially, it's a private security contractor's annual retreat. Volkov won't be able to resist, Harrington predicted. Too many targets in one place. But we'll be ready, Montgomery confirmed. A joint task force is already being assembled. Special operators, intelligence assets, the works. This ends now. Mac exchanged a glance with Thompson, who gave a slight nod. They both recognized what wasn't being said. This was no longer a defensive operation. They were going hunting. Sir, Mac said carefully, I'd like to request that Shadow Company be included in the operation. Montgomery's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. They're trainees, Lieutenant, not operators. With respect, sir, they've been targeted specifically because of their association with me. They've earned the right to be part of this. And they've been training for exactly this scenario, Harrington added, surprising everyone with his support. They're ready. Montgomery studied both of them for a long moment. Your call, Colonel. They're your men. He turned back to Mac. You'll coordinate with my staff on the operational details. We move in 72 hours. After the general departed to inspect the damage to the barracks, Thompson approached Mac. You sure about this, bringing Shadow Company into a live operation against someone like Volkov? They're not just trainees anymore, Sergeant. They're soldiers who deserve to know what they're fighting for. Thompson nodded slowly. Then they'll need to know everything, the whole truth. That evening, Mac gathered Shadow Company in the motor pool, the noise of engines providing cover against any surveillance. The men assembled quickly, faces serious, postures alert. They'd changed in the weeks under her command, hardened, focused, unified by purpose rather than resentment. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level," she began. "None of it leaves this room." For the next hour, she briefed them on Talon, on Volkov, on the operation to come. She told them about the hunting of operators, about the threat to their unit, and about the trap they would help spring in the Appalachian Mountains. She held nothing back, trusting them with the truth they had earned through blood, sweat, and transformation. When she finished, the silence was heavy with the weight of understanding. Then slowly, one of the sergeants stepped forward, Davis one of the first to accept her leadership. "When do we deploy, ma'am? No questions about the risk, no hesitation about the danger. Just the simple soldier's question that mattered most. When do we do our duty?" Mac felt something tighten in her chest, pride mixed with the solemn responsibility of leading men into harm's way. 48 hours. Get your gear in order." As they dispersed to prepare, Mitchell lingered behind. "They're ready," he said quietly. "You've made them ready." "We'll see," she replied, but deep down she knew he was right. They weren't Delta Company anymore, the unit's cast-offs and problem children. They were Shadow Company, now molded in the image of something greater than themselves. The abandoned FEMA training facility stood silent in the Appalachian foothills, its weathered buildings reclaimed by creeping vines and stubborn moss. Once a hive of activity where emergency response teams honed their skills, it had been decommissioned 15 years earlier, left to slowly surrender to nature's persistent advance. Now it teemed with hidden life again. Special operators positioned throughout the complex. Communications specialists monitoring every frequency. Snipers nestled in distant ridgelines. And at the heart of it all, Shadow Company deployed in strategic positions, their weeks of intensive training about to face its ultimate test. In the command center, a renovated administration building with hastily installed equipment, Max studied the tactical display with Montgomery and Harrington. Tiny blue dots represented their forces arranged in a defensive web designed to capture anything that entered. "Latest intelligence suggests Volkov has assembled a team of at least 12 operatives," Montgomery reported. "Former Spetsnaz ex-intelligence mercenaries. High-level talent." "Any sign of Wolf?" Mac asked. "Negative. He appears to be running communication support from a distance. We're still trying to locate his position." Harrington leaned over the display. "Perimeter sensors are active. Motion detection, thermal imaging, acoustic monitoring. If they come within 2 kilometers, we'll know." But Mac wasn't convinced. "Volkov trained with us, Colonel. He knows our protocols, our technologies. Standard perimeter security won't be enough. Which is why we have Shadow Company running irregular patrols," Harrington replied. "No fixed patterns, no predictable rotations. Just like you taught them." As darkness fell across the mountains, the operation settled into the tense quiet of waiting. In the command center, Montgomery insisted that Harrington remain with the tactical team surrounded by security. "You're the one he has history with," the general explained. "You need to be protected." Harrington bristled at the suggestion. "With respect, sir, I'm still a field-grade officer. I don't need babysitting." "It's not babysitting, Colonel. It's strategic placement. You're the bait in this trap as much as the supposed gathering of operators." The night deepened. Hours passed with nothing but routine check-ins from the patrols. Midnight came and went. 1 a.m., 2. The tension in the command center had begun to fray into restlessness when the first report came in. "Command, this is Echo 3. Movement in Sector 7. Single individual moving tactically." Mac leaned forward, studying the display as a new indicator appeared on the map. "Track but do not engage. Let's see where they're going." More reports filtered in rapidly. 2 figures approaching from the east. Another team from the north. Coordinated professional using the terrain for cover. Classic infiltration tactics. "They're probing our perimeter," Mitchell observed from his position at the communication station. "Looking for holes." "Let them find some," Mac replied. "The ones we prepared." The dance continued through the early morning hours, the infiltrators advancing cautiously. Mac's teams tracking, but not engaging, allowing them to penetrate the outer security layers. At 4 a.m., the first direct contact came. A sentry team discovered one of the infiltrators, leading to a brief exchange of fire non-lethal rounds only as per Montgomery's orders. The infiltrator retreated, apparently believing he had encountered a routine patrol rather than a prepared position. "They're getting bolder," Montgomery noted. "Dawn will accelerate their timeline." "Good," Mac replied. "The sooner they commit, the sooner this ends." But as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the mountains, something changed. The pattern of infiltration shifted. The careful probing gave way to more aggressive movement. "They're converging on the main building," reported a spotter. Multiple teams coordinated approach. Too coordinated, Mac realized suddenly. Too confident. She turned to the communications officer. "Check all frequencies now." The officer's fingers flew across his keyboard. His expression darkened. "We're being jammed. Local frequencies only. They're inside our communications." "They know our positions," Harrington said, his face grim. Mac's mind raced. "Change the plan. All teams fall back to secondary positions. Authentication protocol, echo." The authentication would confirm the order came from her, not from someone who had hijacked their communications. But the damage was done. The infiltrators had gained an advantage. "How did they get our frequencies?" Montgomery demanded. "They didn't," Mac replied, the truth dawning to her. "They were given them." Harrington's face paled. "We have a leak." The realization changed everything. If Volkov had inside information, the carefully laid trap could become a killing ground for the wrong side. "Lock down the command center," Mac ordered. "No one in or out without direct authorization from me." As security personnel moved to secure the door, she turned to Mitchell. "Get to your team. Make sure they understand. Trust no communications unless authenticated." He nodded and departed, moving with purpose. "What about Volkov?" Montgomery asked. "If he has inside information, he might not come himself." "Oh, he'll come," Harrington said grimly. "This is personal for him. He'll want to see it happen." Max studied the surveillance feeds, looking for patterns for the telltale signs of a master tactician. Then she saw at a ridgeline northwest of the facility just outside their security perimeter. The perfect vantage point to observe the entire operation. "There," she said, pointing to the display. "That position commands the best view of the compound. If I were coordinating this assault, that's where I'd be." "It's outside our security perimeter," Montgomery noted. "Exactly. He's staying clear of the trap while springing his own." Mac made a decision. "I'm going after him." Harrington objected immediately. "That's exactly what he wants." "No," she countered. "What he wants is to destroy everything we've built, to erase the legacy." She checked her weapon. "I'm not going to let that happen." Before they could argue further, she was gone, slipping out through a maintenance tunnel that led away from the main building. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the distant musk of wood smoke. Mac moved with practiced silence, using the terrain for cover, avoiding the likely observation points. The ridge was a kilometer away, a difficult approach in the growing daylight over rough ground, but she had trained for worse in conditions far more hostile than these North Carolina mountains. Her body remembered what to do, how to move, how to become part of the landscape rather than an intruder upon it. She advanced methodically, checking her surroundings, alert for tripwires, motion sensors, or other surveillance measures that Volkov might have deployed. As she neared the position, she detected the faint electronic signature of communications equipment, a directional antenna sophisticated enough to penetrate their jamming. She circled wide, approaching from the blind side, using the ridge itself to mask her movement. And there he was. Alexander Volkov, older than his photograph, but still lean, still dangerous. His once dark hair now steel gray, his face weathered by years in the field. He stood beside a compact communications array, speaking quietly into a headset, directing his forces with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. Max studied him for a long moment, measuring distances, angles, options. Then she stepped into the clearing, her weapon raised. "Hello, Volkov." He turned remarkably composed for a man suddenly facing an armed opponent. His eyes cold and calculating, assessed her with professional detachment. "Phantoms," he said, his accent still thick despite decades in the West. "I wondered if you would come." "You've been busy," she replied, "hunting my people." "Your people," he smiled thinly. "You mean Harrington's little experiments, his disposable soldiers?" "They weren't disposable to us." No. Volkov seemed genuinely curious. Then why send them to places like Gaddafi and operations that never existed? You know why? Because some missions cannot bear scrutiny. He gestured toward the facility below where flashes of light indicated the operation was still unfolding. Just like tonight, how many will die here for Harrington's pride, for his legacy? None if you call off your men. Volkov laughed, a sound without humor. You still don't understand. This was never about killing operators. It was about exposing the truth. By murdering veterans, by targeting trainees, by forcing accountability, he countered, your government disavows these operations, pretends they never happen. The men who order them sleep soundly in their beds, while those who execute them carry the weight alone. There was something in his voice, not just anger, but pain. The pain of someone who had seen too much done, too much all in the name of duty. What happened to you? Mac asked, genuinely curious despite the tension of the moment. Volkov's expression hardened. I was like you, once believing in the mission, in the necessity of the shadows. Until I saw what it really was, powerful men using loyal soldiers as tools, as weapons to be discarded when no longer useful. And your answer is to hunt those soldiers, the ones who served just like you did. My answer is to expose the system that created them, that created us. He gestured to the communications array. Tonight, everything changes. I have journalists ready to receive files, operations, locations, names. The entire history of America's shadow wars laid bare. Mac felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. You'll put thousands of lives at risk. Some truths demand sacrifice. Not this kind. She tightened her grip on her weapon. I can't let you do this. You can't stop it, he replied calmly. The transmission is automated. If I don't enter a code every 30 minutes, everything sends automatically. Kill me and you only accelerate the process. It was a clever failsafe, and Mac knew he was telling the truth. She could see it in his eyes, the satisfaction of a man who had planned for every contingency, but not quite everyone. I'm not going to kill you, Volkov. She lowered her weapon slightly. I'm going to show you something. Slowly, deliberately, she rolled up her sleeve, revealing her tattoo, the eagle of talons, stark against her skin. You know what this means? What it costs to earn it. A mark of ownership, he said dismissively. Harrington's brand on his attack dogs. No, she took a step closer. A symbol of choice. We chose the shadows. We chose to carry burdens others couldn't, not because we were ordered to, but because someone had to. Noble sentiments for assassination squads. Is that what you think we were kill teams? She shook her head. We extracted dissidents from North Korea. We secured nuclear material in the Caucasus. We prevented genocide in Africa. Yes, sometimes we killed, but more often we saved. Volkov's expression wavered just slightly. Convenient justifications. Truth. She reached into her pocket and withdrew 2 coins. Her Talon token and an older medallion, the Shadow Hunter's emblem she had found in the archive. Do you know what these really represent? Not programs, not operations. Legacy. The understanding that what we do matters even if no one ever knows we did it. She held them out. Your name is in the Shadow Hunter's archives, Volkov. You were one of us once before something changed you. His eyes fixed on the coins, recognition flickering across his features. Where did you get that? From the men you've been hunting, the ones who carried the same burden you did. She took another step closer. Whatever happened to you, whatever turned you against your own, it doesn't have to end this way. For a moment, just a moment, something like doubt crossed his face. Then his expression hardened again. It's too late. The system is corrupt. It needs to be exposed, whatever the cost. And the cost will be paid by the operators in the field, the ones like us, not by the politicians, not by the generals, just the soldiers. Volkov hesitated, conflict visible in his eyes. Some prices must be paid. I agree, Max said quietly, but not by the wrong people. A sound from behind a twig snapping. Volkov reacted instantly, reaching for a weapon concealed at his back. Mac moved faster, tackling him just as a shot rang out. They tumbled to the ground, Mac twisting to absorb the impact. More shots, a brief exchange of fire in the darkness. Then silence. Mac rolled to her feet, weapon ready, scanning for threats. A figure emerged from the trees. Mitchell, his rifle at low ready. "Captain," he called. "You all right?" "Fine," she replied, turning back to Volkov. The Russian lay on his side, blood spreading across his jacket. The bullet had caught him in the shoulder, serious, but not immediately life-threatening. "Who fired first?" she demanded. "Not us," Mitchell assured her. "One of his men. We tracked him up here after you left." Volkov coughed, grimacing in pain. "It doesn't matter. The countdown continues. 15 minutes until the files transmit." Mac knelt beside him. "Tell me how to stop it." "Why should I?" "Because deep down you know this isn't about justice. It's about pain. Your pain." She held his gaze. "I understand that better than you think. But this will only create more victims." Volkov's breathing was becoming labored shock, setting in. His eyes, once cold with purpose, now held uncertainty. "The men you've killed," Mac continued, "they were like you, carrying the same weight, fighting the same battles within themselves." "They served a corrupt system," he insisted, but the conviction was fading from his voice. "They served their country just like you served yours before you lost faith." Something broke in his expression, then a crack in the armor of certainty he had built around himself. "The code," he said finally. 61983, the year we trained together, Harrington and I. Mac nodded to Mitchell, who moved quickly to the communications array. Moments later, he called back. "It's done. Transmission canceled." Volkov closed his eyes, decades of tension seeming to drain from his body. "He was right about you," he said softly. "Who was Harrington? When he trained us, he said the best operators weren't the ones who followed orders blindly. They were the ones who understood why the orders mattered." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I forgot that part." As medical personnel arrived to treat Volkov's wound, Max stood surveying the ridgeline, the facility below the mountains beyond. The operation was winding down. Volkov's men surrendering once they realized their leader had been captured. Mitchell approached, his expression somber. "We found the leak. Junior communications officer been feeding Volkov information for weeks." "Why Parma?" "Money, he claims, but I think there's more to it." Mac nodded. There was always more to it. The shadows bred their own kind of darkness, their own temptations and compromises. "What happens now?" Mitchell asked. "To all of this?" He gestured vaguely, encompassing the facility, the operation, the programs they represented. "That's not for us to decide," she replied. "We do the work. Others determine its place in history." "Seems unfair." "It's the nature of shadows, Mitchell. They exist because of light, but they're defined by what they conceal." He considered this. "And you're okay with it, Pat?" "With no recognition, no acknowledgement." She touched the place where her tattoo lay beneath her uniform. "The recognition that matters is here. The acknowledgement comes from those who understand what it costs." 6 months later, a small ceremony took place in a secluded courtyard at Fort Liberty. No press, no public announcement, just a gathering of those who needed to be there. Harrington Thompson, Mitchell Montgomery, and 20 soldiers who had proven themselves worthy of a special designation. Mac, now Major Blackwood, stood before them, her captain's bars replaced by the gold oak leaf of her new rank. In her hands, she held a box containing 20 silver coins, newly minted, but bearing an ancient symbol, an eagle in flight, 3 arrows in its talons, surrounded by 13 stars. "Today, you join a lineage that has no name in the official records," she told them. "A tradition of service that exists in the spaces between what is acknowledged and what is necessary." One by one, they approached, each receiving a coin and a handshake. No speeches, no certificates, just the silent exchange of symbol and commitment. When the last coin was distributed, Mac addressed them once more. "The eagle you now carry represents not just what you've accomplished, but what you've chosen to become. Remember that choice on the difficult days ahead." They stood at attention, these men and women who had proven themselves not just skilled, but worthy of the shadows. Different faces, different backgrounds, united by a common purpose and the understanding that some battles must be fought beyond the light of recognition. "Dismissed," she said finally. As they dispersed, Harrington approached her. "They're ready," he said. "You've done good work here." "We've done good work," she corrected. "All of us." He nodded, acknowledging the truth of it. "Your father would be proud." "I think he is," she replied, "wherever he is." Later, as twilight settled over the training grounds, Mac walked alone to the edge of the property where a simple memorial had been erected. Not an official monument, just a stone marker bearing the eagle symbol and the words, "For those who served in silence, your shadows will never fade." She placed her hand on the cool stone, feeling the connection to all who had come before, the named and unnamed, the acknowledged and the forgotten, the visible and the hidden. This was the true legacy of the eagle. Not glory, not recognition, but the quiet understanding that some battles must be fought from the shadows by those willing to stand guard where the light cannot reach. As darkness fell, Major Mackenzie Blackwood turned back toward the base, toward the future she was building in the spaces between light and shadow. The eagle on her shoulder no longer felt like a burden or a brand. It was a reminder of the choice she had made and continued to make each day. To serve where service was hardest. To fight where fighting was necessary. To lead where leadership demanded the greatest sacrifice. In the distance, her trainees were gathering for night operations. Their movements precise, their purpose clear. Thompson stood with them, sharing stories that connected them to the past. Mitchell directed their preparation with the confidence of a man who had found his calling. And somewhere beyond the perimeter, Montgomery and Harrington were ensuring that their work would continue protected from the politics and publicity that might compromise its effectiveness. This was her world now. Not a hidden one, but a chosen one. Not a place of darkness, but a place of necessary shadow. The eagle soared on silent against the night sky. Its wings spread wide, its gaze fixed on horizons unseen by ordinary eyes. And beneath it, the guardians of those shadows continued their eternal watch. Their names unspoken, their deeds unheralded, their purpose unwavering. This was the way of the eagle. This was the legacy of shadows.